Disliked in the West and sent in large numbers to the Soviet Union, the Bell P-63 Kingcobra ended up seeing little action during World War II, and, consequently, became one of the lesser-known American fighters of the period, especially considering more than 3,000 were built. But, was the Outcast Kingcobra totally without merit? The P-63 Kingcobra was directly based on the P-39 Airacobra, which had been poorly received in Western countries but very favorably in the Soviet Union. We won't look at the P-39 in detail, since there is a video dedicated to it on this channel, but in a very succinct way we can say that it had several issues, the major ones being poor high-altitude performance, center of gravity issues leading to dangerous flat spins, and deformation of the tail under high G loads. By no means is this an exhaustive list, but these were the main issues Bell aimed to correct with the new P-63. Since the Kingcobra was a direct development, it kept the Airacobra's quirks, such as a tricycle landing gear, a mid-fuselage mounted engine, or the nose-mounted 37mm cannon. The Kingcobra originated from the XP-39E, which was a failed attempt to improve the Airacobra's performance at high altitude. This experimental fighter had modified wings and tailplane, an engine with a better supercharger, and a longer fuselage. It was ordered in the first half of 1941, and flew for the first time on February 21, 1942, but was quickly deemed inferior to the P-39D, and development was eventually cancelled. This put an end to what would have been called the P-76 had it been produced. But in a parallel timeline, two prototypes of a bigger version of the XP-39E were ordered in June 1941. These were given the XP-63 designation, and the first of these flew for the first time on December 7, 1942. The result, the P-63, was something quite different from the P-39D. The Kingcobra had a lengthier wingspan and an overall increase in wing area. It was also quite longer and had a reinforced rear fuselage, though it needed more reinforcement over time. The tailplane was quite different, being both taller and larger. This is one of the easiest ways of distinguishing a P-39 from a P-63. It also had laminar airflow wings, just like the P-51 Mustang. These wings had a smoother upper surface, a symmetrical cross-section, and the point of maximum thickness pushed as far back as possible. In simple terms, the aim was to keep a smoother airflow over the wing by delaying the separation of the boundary layer. The practical result was that the P-63's wings gave an 11% reduction in drag compared to the P-39's. At first, it was powered by an Ellison V1710-93, a V12 liquid-cooled piston engine that produced up to 1325 horsepower, or 1500 on a contingency power rating limited to 5 minutes. It had a two-stage supercharger that gave it better high-altitude performance, correcting one of the biggest flaws concerning the P-39. The Ellison engine drove a 4-bladed constant-speed propeller. This distinction can also be used to tell apart both aircraft, since nearly all P-39s were fitted with a 3-bladed propeller, but some late models of the Q variant also had a 4-bladed one. The P-63 kept the nose-mounted 37mm cannon and the two nose-mounted heavy machine guns, but traded the P-39D's 4 wing-mounted light machine guns for two of the heavier type. But despite all the work put in by Bell, the fledgling fighter didn't live up to the expectations, since it was deemed inferior to the P-51 Mustang of the B variant. The first Merlin engine Mustang, the XP-51B, had flown for the first time in November 1942, about 1 week before the first Kingcobra prototype did. It had reached an astonishing top speed of 440 miles per hour, well above the 426 miles per hour that the XP-63 had reached. From then on, the Merlin engines were given top priority for the Mustang. They were never fitted in the second prototype of the Kingcobra, which was supposed to be a test bed for that engine. If we compare the production versions of both aircraft, we can see that the P-51B1 kept the speed advantage over the Kingcobra, as the P-63A was slower than its prototype. Both fighters had similar climbing ability, but based on the values published in their flight manuals, the Mustang had a large advantage in range. We can also see that the P-63 was superior in some areas, like armament, but what the US needed at that point was an escort fighter. And, in that role, the Mustang was superior. And so, once again, the Bell Aircraft Corporation had the Soviet Air Force as its main client. An agreement to supply the P-63 under Lend-Lease was signed in 1943, and deliveries of the Kingcobra started in June 1944 and would last until the end of the war, amounting to 2,400 planes delivered out of a total of 3,303 produced. The Kingcobra would become the third American aircraft sent to the Soviet Union in largest numbers, behind the P-39 and the A-20, according to the number of aircraft that actually reached the Soviet Union. But unlike the Airacobra, the P-63 didn't have a big impact on the war, as with this specific Lend-Lease agreement came a restriction of not using it on the European front. Nonetheless, a small number of sources have hinted that the Soviets did indeed use the American fighter against Germany, even if in a small capacity. But officially, the only time the Soviet Union used the P-63 in combat was when, on August 9, 1945, it invaded the Japanese puppet state of Manchukuo. The Japanese offered little resistance, giving very few opportunities for aerial combat, and it seems that the Kingcobra achieved only one victory during the Second World War: the downing of a Ki-43 Oscar belonging to the Imperial Japanese Army on the 15th of August. But the Second World War wasn't the end for the Kingcobras under the Soviet Union. After the conflict, a large number of aircraft types were scrapped, and the Kingcobra was to follow suit when the decision was reversed due to one of its quirks: its tricycle landing gear. With the advent of jet aircraft, that configuration became the standard, and the Cobras were used until 1953 to train Soviet pilots in the art of landing with tricycle landing gears, before they moved on to jets like the MiG-15. In a funny turn of events, due to this extended lifespan, the American aircraft earned a NATO reporting name, becoming known as Fred. But, of all the unconventional uses military aircraft had during the Second World War, the Kingcobra had one that would rank pretty high. It was used in Operation Pinball, a program run by the United States Army Air Force to provide better training to bomber gunners, and the objectives were pretty simple: give a realistic, moving target to shoot at, and find a way to let gunners know if they had hit their target or not. About 30 Kingcobras were reskinned with armor plate, and these would fly up to the bombers where the gunners would fire frangible bullets made of lead and plastic that would shatter on impact, leaving the P-63s mostly untouched. Every time one was hit, a light would turn on its propeller hub, letting the gunners know they had been successful. Another radical transformation undergone by the Kingcobra was what became known as the L-39. After the war, two P-63Cs were converted to have wings with a sweep of 35 degrees. These were thoroughly tested to determine the merits of swept-back wings, which would become the standard in jet-powered aviation. Beyond the US and the Soviet Union, the French Armée de l'Air also received in excess of 100 Kingcobras. These started being delivered on July 26, 1945, too late for World War II, but they would later see broad action in Southeast Asia. The Honduran Air Force also received 5 Kingcobras. So, was the Kingcobra a bad aircraft? In a critical way, it can be said that the Kingcobra was what the Airacobra should have been from the start, and that those improvements came too late. However, we should keep in mind that the insight required for many of those was gained through hard combat experience, and the P-39 was designed before the US joined the war. In addition, we can point out that the US was spoiled with choice toward the end of the war. Aircraft like the P-51 Mustang, P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-38 Lightning were more suited to American needs, and being overlooked for those doesn't make the Kingcobra necessarily a bad plane. I'm pretty sure countries like Finland, Italy or even possibly Japan would have found a place for it as a bomber interceptor. We can also speculate on what the Kingcobra would have become if it had received the Merlin engine. Beyond that, I feel that the Kingcobra inherited the P-39's bad fame. Proof of this is a famous picture of one being delivered to the Soviet Union on the Alaskan-Siberian route. Unfortunately, I can't use the picture itself due to copyright, but I can make an awkward replica. The inscription Bell Booby Trap was written on the nose of a P-63C. Despite being quite funny, I feel that the American crews had no reason to classify it as a booby trap, since it wasn't used in combat by the United States Army Air Force. And, as far as I'm aware, most issues with the CG had been solved. So, I feel this bad fame was possibly inherited from the Airacobra. Finally, addressing the most sensitive topic when it comes to the P-63, was it or not used against Germany? Regarding the opinions of Western historians and authors, a lot leave this issue as an open possibility, but I didn't find any that claimed outright that it happened. However, the few Eastern authors that I read on this subject utterly deny this. As such, even though I sympathize with the idea that the Soviet Union would have used the Kingcobra had they had the need, I must say it wasn't used on a large scale, or there would be proof. If the Soviets did use it, they covered their tracks well. But hey, this is just my opinion. Please let me know yours in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, I'll see you again soon.